Okay, Trevor, welcome
Hey
back.
Josh.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Beat the Odds at Business and Wealth podcast here. Yeah, it's Trevor. You're traveling, so tell us where you are today.
I'm traveling. So right now, we're broadcasting from the lobby of the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas.
Okay, right on. And I'm in the Vancouver office, so we're trying to make do without our podcast studio here today. But
That's right. And I've got to catch a plane soon. So
there you
let's
go.
get on with the show. What's going on there?
Okay, so I mean, we were going to do a little bit of an update on the housing market to see kind of if it's bottom, but we had something that kind of popped up, and it was to deal with Canadian student debt, and we posted a bit of a reel, and the reel was just discussing the difference between Canadian grads, like we're we hire
Yeah.
in Canada, we hire Canadian accounting grads. And then in the Philippines office, we also are hiring Filipino accounting grads, and we just noticed like the very stark difference. And we posted it online, and we had I think 400,000 views on the reel, right?
400,000 views?
And
Oh
yeah,
my
for
gosh.
and it's just kind of interesting too. We do sometimes this content because we tell our clients like they have to make content as well too. So we're coming here to you. Trevor's on. I'm working in the out of town office and in the satellite office here in Vancouver, and Trevor's in on vacation. But we're still making content. But interesting, like when we made the content, it's kind of funny because I never actually know what's going to happen on the reel. Like I just know Ty's going to clip, a minute from somewhere, and something I might like it, I might hate it, but we're just going to roll with it when it's there. And we did this one, and 400,000 views, right? And kind of interesting because one of the first comments says, "Well, this isn't very interesting." Interesting, and that's probably like the last thing I see before I go to sleep is this video is not very interesting. But I don't really care that much about it. Then you wake up and it's like it just kind of explodes, right? But let's break into the root of the issue because anything that does break out like that, it's because it struck a nerve, right? It's
Yeah,
because it's
exactly. Now, what kind of comments are we getting on those? Are we going to get into that?
yeah, like the comments were the gist of it is basically a lot of Filipino parents will pay for their children's education. It's very near and dear to their hearts culturally that their parents are going to do what they can to pay for their education. Okay, now I'm not going to give people like exact translations, but neither the Philippines or Canada are like the U.S. It's not like there's the the Ivy schools have got the stronghold and the tuitions have
Hmm.
gone to kind of Never Land, right? They might not be cheap, but they're not as bad as they are in the U.S., right? And so they are attainable. But it is a little bit of a different view on okay. Should you pay for your kids' education? And it's very
Right.
interesting. And so, yes, there are, from my perception, is there are a large number of Filipino parents based on hiring these Filipino grads that are paying for their kids' education. And proportionately, when I look at the Canadian grads who work for us, they've accumulated debt. So their parents have not paid for their education. Okay. Um,
Now, what is the cost of the education? Is it comparative between Philippines and Canadian dollars, or is it like much less?
well, I mean, it's much less than the Philippines, but comparatively, in terms of income, it's similar. In terms of income, it's similar, right? So but there's a catch to that for all the Filipino grads that I've met is there's a bigger obligation to once you start working to send money or support your parents too. So
There you go.
it might not be a loan on paper, a conventional loan, but it's there is a there is kind of a inherent financial obligation with it, right?
A little understanding.
Yeah, but the crux of it, this entire podcast is, how to beat the odds at money and wealth. And so whether you're Canadian or whether you're a Filipino, I mean, that's ultimately maybe you're Canadian here and you have some debt, and maybe you're a Filipino there and you don't have any debt. It's like what should you do? Okay, let's walk down the Canadian path first. So Trevor, when you went to school, Trevor's a Gen
Mhm.
X. I'm a millennial. So like Trevor, when you went to school, did you accumulate any debt?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, would you have done it?
Would I have done the debt part?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so because, the value that I got from the education just wasn't there for me. I
Yeah.
wasn't going for a degree. I went for a diploma, and then afterwards, when I did trade school, that was worth it for sure. But I didn't accumulate any debt doing that because I was
Yeah.
working at the same time, right?
Yeah.
But any of the post-secondary that I've done, the value isn't there.
Yeah. Okay, so and myself, I didn't accumulate any debt either. Okay, I didn't have the substantial help from parents paying for schooling, right? For the most part, I had to pay for schooling, but I did get some help from scholarships. I had a hockey scholarship, I had some academic scholarships, and I worked a lot a lot. Like
Yeah,
I'm people are going to hear scholarships and they're going to start searching. I was like, yeah, yeah. The scholarships were small. They sound good. The working was a lot, right?
yeah, yeah,
I can remember in university where I was working at as a lifeguard, and I would work, until 10 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, and then I would sleep in the first aid room. I would sleep in the first aid room, and I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, after sleeping for 6 hours, and then drive to the hockey practice that was also giving me, the $2 an hour. So I would drive from the $20 an hour job to the $2 an hour job, to do it. So,
yeah.
if you're planning it out, the first decision is, depending on where you are in this process, is like, should you actually accumulate that debt, right? And I think you have to think long and hard as a student of accumulating that debt, unless it's a very high income skill. And I don't mean like your arts degree. That's not a high income skill. Okay. It's are you are you going to be a doctor? Are you going to be a lawyer? That's a kind of a high income skill. An engineer. It's like, okay, if we're accumulating debt for that, that kind of makes sense. Okay. Um,
All right. So I don't know if you can hear me, but my earphones have died. So I'm having a hard time hearing you, but I'm gonna see if I can grab another one. But let's see what we got on the Instagram feed.
yeah, no problem, here. I can hear you. No problem. Um, when you're accumulating, like if you do accumulate that debt though, so like the question is like, if you do accumulate that debt as a Canadian, what are you going to have to do with it? Okay. The first thing you have to kind of understand is you might want to buy a house. Okay. So I would say the fundamental difference on if you're a Canadian versus a Filipino, and a lot of it degenerated, a lot of the discussion online degenerated into which one is better off, right? From my perspective, it was just an observation, right? But I actually think both of them have very good paths on what they should do. The advantage in Canada is, okay, you're
Yeah.
going to graduate say if you do graduate with some debt. Now, the next part is what you do. Now, most people would think like, okay, the main advantage that a Canadian has is that they're in a higher income earning environment. And yes, that's an advantage, but that's not the biggest advantage that I believe that they have. Okay. Because they're in a higher income earning environment, but everything costs more. And I mean dramatically more.
Everything
Everything
costs more.
costs
Yeah,
dramatically more. And so the
yeah.
difference on when I look at, what a grad in Canada makes versus what it costs them to live and what they have left over to buy assets, that they
Hmm.
actually have, substantially less available to buy assets. Okay. Whereas a Filipino is like, they're making less, but their living costs are dramatically less. And some of the living costs, like I would say the main one is shared accommodations. Shared accommodations is common in the Philippines, and
Hmm.
it's almost like it's almost like just not thought of in Canada enough as a solution. When in reality, it's like most Canadian grads, when they first get out, they can't afford it. Okay, so they
Right.
actually can't they can't afford to go rent an apartment on on their own or buy a house
Mhm.
on their own. So you kind of have to look at that. It's like should you actually do that? Shared accommodations would work in either jurisdiction. It's just one is expected and one is not expected. In Canada, you're not, it's expected that you should be able to graduate and, rent an
Right.
apartment in downtown Vancouver and everything should be good. And if it's not working
Oh
that
yeah.
way,
Yeah. Right. Downtown
obviously
Vancouver. Right.
I just have to vote, a different way the next time and everything will work out. It's like, no, that's
Yeah.
not going to work, right?
Unfortunately, a lot of people's investment strategy is behind me right now. I don't know if you
Yeah.
can see that, but bunch of slot machines.
Yeah.
I'm gonna win the lotto.
So, okay, so you're the Canadian student, you come out and you have some debt. Okay, so the first thing is you're probably going to have to cut your living expenses down, similar to how a Filipino would do it. Shared accommodations, they're living with family or friends,
Mm.
and they're drastically reducing their living expenses. Okay, that would be number one. Okay, but then the number two is here's where Canadians have the bigger advantage and they have access to tier one assets. Okay. So they actually have access to the Canadian stock market and they have
Yeah.
access to, Canadian real estate. Okay. And it's my view as we move through this inflationary train, it's like you're going to be able to buy assets in some countries that have resources. And then there's going to be assets in other countries that don't have resources. And I think the currency is going to be the great equalizer of that. And so if you buy an asset in one country and it doubles in value, but your currency value gets cut in half, you didn't actually
Mm.
make any money, right?
No.
And so the access as a Canadian that you have to assets that are likely, to likely keep pace with inflation, it is higher. And that might be hard for some Canadians because they're up to understand because they're upset with how things are run. But in reality, it's like there are countries that have resources and ones that don't. And despite all of the mismanagement, the ones that have the resources are likely to keep pace. Okay. And so now you're a Canadian working towards buying a house. You can contribute to your FHSA, okay, new vehicle, completely tax deductible from income, and you can withdraw it when it's time to buy a house, and you can also contribute to your RSP. For as much as I tell everyone it's a scam, I like the home buyers plan. I used the home buyers plan when I was young, and I
Right.
recommend for other people to use the home buyers plan. I'm contributing to that RSP. It's just once I was done with contributing to the RSP for the purpose of buying my first house, I'm out. Okay, I'm out, right? And
Yeah. There's no
so
need to be in an RSP after that.
that's right. So if you are a Canadian, okay, that is a very realistic path. And then probably the number one thing that most people don't know, you're trying to beat the odds at money and wealth. Is like you just finished school. I don't care what you did. You're still a baby in terms of your skill level.
Hmm.
Okay. The difference, the number one thing that you should do is you should continue to increase your skill level. You should continue to build around that. I don't mean like change directions. I mean, build around that core, build out from that core. So whatever that profession you got, it's like learn more about that, be the expert in that, learn other, trades or professions that are very, very similar and build out from that core. That would be the number one thing that I would do in either jurisdiction. But that's kind of the path for the Canadian is they're going to come out of school, they're going to have some debt, but their living costs are going to be dramatically higher. And unless they, reduce their expectations, they stop listening to Scotiabank telling them you're richer than you think, you're not actually going to have any more than the Filipino, okay? Because one of the comments that I saw was kind of funny. Is like, well, sometimes people graduate from the Philippines here and they can only get a job serving coffee. And I laughed. I was like, do you know how many Canadian university grads are out there working at Starbucks right now? There's a lot of them, right? And so, a lot of times when you come out of school, let's say you come out with a generic business degree, I would not be stopping with a generic business degree because it's not a certification that allows you to do something that there's a legal barrier for other people, that they can't do. And that's the types, when people are asking me, should I go to school for something? It's like, you should go to school for something that gives you a certificate or designation that legally prevents other people from doing it. Okay. It doesn't mean you're better. It just means it provides you an additional advantage, right?
Gives you a bit of a buffer and a protection.
Yeah.
And usually those types of skills are higher paid because they're more sought after, more difficult to attain.
Yeah. And so like I also like look at skills where you could be self-employed. I don't necessarily want to be an X-ray technician because it's very difficult to, to obtain to buy a radiology clinic. Whereas comparatively, if you become a massage therapist or a chiropractor, for example, that's a much easier business to start. There's going to be more avenues to you. Okay. So that's, kind of number one path. But I want to contrast that for the Filipinos, okay? Because here's where it's valuable even for the Canadians to know, what happens. So through the average Filipino coming out, and you do not have any. So first of all, with the Canadians, I would just be contributing to that RRSP, to the FHSA and the RRSP, because the student loan rates, they're very low. Like the federal loan rate is basically 0%. It's a weird loan where now you're paying 0% interest. In some of the provinces you have interest, but you should be able to outperform it. So you should give some significant thought, if that is the only debt in your life, so just letting it ride, making the mandatory payments, and investing the difference. You're going to win on the arbitrage. Okay, so that's something that Canadians should consider, right? Whereas on the Filipino end, they're coming out without any debt whatsoever. Okay, they're generally going to figure out how to live very cost effectively. They're just used to doing it. They're used to
Right.
doing
Yeah.
it. It's called like culturally, people with shared accommodations is normal. Okay, so a lot of times when they graduate, they're going to jump an income level, and all of a sudden they have more money than they used to. It's like the key is, don't upgrade your lifestyle. Don't become the Canadian who just all of a sudden thinks that they can live right up to that income level. It's like, just keep living the way you were living, which is earning the new income. Okay, that's step one. But when you graduate in the Philippines, it's like you don't necessarily have access to tier one assets. Okay. And so not the conventional ones. And so what
Mhm.
do a lot of the people who, work for us in the Philippines, like, what do we tell them to invest in? Is like, buy Bitcoin. It's like, you can get access to Bitcoin. It's 100% portable. It's been the best performing asset. It's like, that is the horse. And as crazy as it sounds to a Canadian, because, I've never recommended to a Canadian to be 100% in Bitcoin. But if I'm in a third world country, and I don't mean that derogatively, I just mean it in terms of, GDP per capita of less than $10,000 per person. It's like, you really got to give some serious consideration on, do you want any assets that are tied to that country?
Mhm.
What are the risks that it's going to be taxed away, confiscated away, or completely devalued with currency? It's very, very high. And so comparatively speaking, based on having all of your eggs, so to speak, in Bitcoin, it's like it kind of starts to make sense. The risk level makes sense, even though that's wild to think about. If you're sitting there in Iran, 100% of your investments in Bitcoin is much more secure than 100% in Iranian real estate. Like
Yeah.
how it works. Okay, so then that person is sitting there, they have that. The next step is, I probably do want a skill. I want to work for an employer that is
Mhm.
going to give me access to a tier one country. Okay. And so you're looking at like, if someone in the Philippines was likely to do this, now they're trying to get access to an employer who's going to get them access to a tier one country. And then you're likely, the next step once you get there is, you're probably going to have to, update skills that they're now transferable to that tier one country. Because unfortunately, they don't always transfer over directly, right? But most of them, I would say, the next part that the Filipinos that I've met are probably underestimating is, they're underestimating how long they're going to live, and what their working years are going to be. There seems to
Right.
be this thing. I was like, I got to make my monies in my 20s and 30s, where because then I'll be old, right? Then
Oh
I'll be
boy.
old, right? It's kind of strange where the Canadian and North American is more likely to say I'm going to increase my skills in my 20s and 30s and put myself in the place to succeed because I can have a long working career, right? And so that's the path that I would adopt if I was a Filipino. It's like I'm going to come out, I'm going to acquire the only tier one asset that's portable to me, and that's Bitcoin. And then I'm going to work on getting working for an employer who's going to give me access to a tier one jurisdiction. They're going to give me access to Canada. They're going to give me access to the US. They're going to give me access to the United Arab Emirates. I'd be very hesitant about the UK right now. I would be like
Oh man, I'd be nervous about going to the
that
UK. It's a bit
that
different.
it's a bit of a it's a bit of a disaster right now. And so comparatively speaking, if I can escape the Philippines and work in the UK, I'm probably doing it. But if I could go to Canada, the US, Australia, the UAE instead, I would do that. And so once you get there, now you can work on getting an asset, probably real estate in a tier one jurisdiction. And and
Awesome.
and that's likely the path. But then in both scenarios, once you get that real estate in the tier one jurisdiction, you started with shared accommodations, you're still in shared accommodations. You want to get a piece of real estate that has one more bedroom than you need, and you want to immediately start generating some rental income from each of it. And that's where it would probably sync up. And in all likelihood, the scary part is if a Canadian was following this advice that I'm giving, and a Filipino was following this path that I'm giving, the Filipino is probably likely to come out ahead because they didn't start with the debt. They're going to get into the fastest moving horse off the top, which is Bitcoin. Okay.
Mhm.
That has some risk because now you have, savings in one basket. And then it depends on how successful you are in getting for an employer who gets you access to a tier one jurisdiction. But I would say, if you're a go-getter and you're likely, the person in the Philippines, because they didn't have that debt, probably outpaces the Canadian because they're going to get access to that overseas market anyways. And so that's just the hard and fast truth. Don't be frustrated if you're the Canadian because there's still the path out. You're
Mhm.
still able to have that higher income right off the hop. And if you can dial down your living expenses, then you're going to be able to invest. Okay. But honestly speaking, if I'm looking at both of them, the Filipino is probably going to be if they follow both those paths, they're probably actually going to be ahead 5 years
Mhm.
out, potentially even 10 years out. After that, they're going to kind of converge, and it's going to be more about the skill and probably the effort that either put in.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that sounds like some good pathways, and I can see why there was some controversy and so many people looking at this post that you made on Instagram and so forth. Because I mean, it's highly controversial what you're saying. Like, I don't think Canadians like hearing that you're not as set up as you think you are, and someone in the Philippines actually has an advantage simply because the no debt policy or no debt lifestyle that they've got after getting their student loans.
Yeah, I mean, you're coming out, you're coming out with a loan of 50 to 100,000 bucks, and you only have income after tax of $3,000 to $4,000, and it's costing you 3,000 a month to live. It's like that's actually a hard equation to solve, right?
Yeah, for sure.
As opposed to a Filipino grad, you're making $1,500 a month, and it's only costing you $500 to live, and you got $1,000 free cash flow right off the bat. Like that's actually hard to
Massive,
recreate for a Canadian sometimes. So
massive head start.
hopefully that gives people, a path in both directions because whether you're in either scenario, the Canadian coming out with some debt or the Filipino that has no debt, but the income is lower. It's like hopefully that gives people a path on, how you could beat the odds at wealth. So
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, everybody, I'm going to be signing off here. I got to go catch a plane, but yeah, if you're ever in Las Vegas, the Venetian is a fantastic hotel. Now I'm going to Seattle and then home to Edmonton. We'll see you guys live